Guten Tag zusammen. Hi everybody. Our lesson on subjects, direct objects, and indirect objects relating to word order was meant to be a little bit more fun than just a regular ed puzzle. We were supposed to play a spoons game where you would identify whether or not it was a subject, direct object, or indirect object by grabbing the correct spoon based upon what you see. We are going to basically do the same thing, only it won't be as competitive or in a group. You'll do it individually on the ed puzzle video as we go. Based on this definition, which spoon would you grab? Subject, direct object, or indirect object? For this, we use the accusative case. The direct object. For this, we use the dative case. That's your indirect object. What does the verb? What verbs is verbing? What does the action of the verb? These are all definitions of the subject. What receives the direct object? What receives the object that gets verbed? This is your indirect object because it's indirectly related to the verb through your direct object. What gets verbed? What receives the action of the verb? This is your direct object. For this, we use the nominative case. We use the nominative case with the subject. Okay, so that was pretty easy. Those are basic definitions of subject, direct objects, and indirect objects, and recognizing the cases that each of them uses. Now we're going to take a look at some sentences and look at the context and determine what is the subject, direct object, and indirect object. So as we take a look at this first picture, we see that there is a woman, and she is handing me, or you, a gift. So we look at the sentence that we have there, and I'm going to highlight one thing in that sentence. So we have the woman. So now we have to determine what the woman is in this sentence. Is she our subject, direct object, or indirect object? She's our subject because she's giving as a gift. How about you? What are you in this sentence? You're the indirect object because you're receiving the gift, the direct object. If we go through and we figure out the endings for these, since our subject is nominative, it's die Frau. You is a pronoun, so that's either du, dich, or dir. Since we have an indirect object, we know we have the dative case. The dative form of du is dir, and so that's why we put that there. And then the last part that we have there is our direct object, and that's accusative neuter. So the ending on our ein word for accusative neuter is nothing. So we can put an X there, or we can just leave it blank. Now before we move on to the next one, I wanted to review a little bit about word order with you in German. Now we know that our verb is always in what position in a German sentence. We know that it's in the second position unless we're asking a question. So we can either start with our subject. Most English sentences will start with our subject, and then we'll have our verb, and then we'll have our indirect object, and then we'll have our direct object. And in English, since we don't have these endings that tell you whether or not it's nominative, accusative, or dative, or your subject, your direct object, or indirect object, the order is very important in an English sentence to understanding what it means. So here, if you have like, my uncle throws the child the ball, mein Onkel wirft dem Kind den Ball. In English, it wouldn't make sense if you said like, said it something like this. The ball throws my uncle the kid. It actually makes it sound like the ball is throwing my uncle the child. In German, you can actually do this. You can start with your direct object. When you start with your direct object in German, it just calls more attention to that direct object. And I can put it in this order because, look, my verb is still in the second position, and my subject and verb are still touching each other. They're still next to each other. So, den Ball wirft mein Onkel dem Kind is actually a correct sentence in German. So we can kind of play with this a little bit. If we wanted to, we could even move our indirect object to the beginning of the sentence here. And it's just calling more attention to the indirect object. Dem Kind wirft mein Onkel den Ball. And again, my subject and verb are still attached. My verb is still in the second position. If I wanted to ask a question now, that would have to change my word order a little bit. I wouldn't have my verb in the second position. Instead, I'd have it in the first position. And so we could start with verb, and then subject, and then we could put our indirect object, direct object. You could flip-flop the word order there if you wanted to. It sounds better in this order, though, in German. Now, when we use pronouns in our sentence, if we use too many of them, we actually have a certain order that is correct in German. So normally, let's start with our English sentence the way we would write it in English. My uncle throws the child the ball. If I want to replace the child with our pronoun, that would be ihm. If I want to replace the ball with it, that would be ihn, and this is actually an incorrect sentence in German. When we put these as pronouns, and we have two pronouns right next to each other, we actually have to flip-flop this order here. And our direct object comes first, and then our indirect object comes next, and that is what sounds best in German. Mein Onkel wirft ihn ihm. There's one more thing I wanted to review with you before we get back to identifying our subjects, direct objects, and indirect objects in sentences in German and figuring out their endings, and that is the use of a new question word. So we have wem is our dative question word that means whom. We already know wer, which means who, and we know wen, which means whom, and wem means whom in the dative case, so it's like to or for whom. We know which one to use based upon what answers that question word. So if I say, like, who is that? That's wer ist das? If I say, whom are you calling? That's wen rufst du an? If I say, whom are you giving the gift? That would be wem gibst du das Geschenk? So depending upon what answers that question, then you can figure out which form of those to use, either wer, wen, or wem. And you'll notice that the endings on these are really similar to our der words. So der in the nominative, den in the accusative, dem in the dative. That's our masculine definite article. If I wanted to ask a question like, whom is my uncle throwing the ball? Wem wirft mein Onkel den Ball? If I wanted to ask who is throwing the child the ball, we would start over like wer wirft dem Kind den Ball? If I wanted, well, I guess we can't really use wen here because our direct object isn't a person, it's a thing. You would have to use was. But you get the idea of how these question words are used. Okay, so that was a quick recap of things that we should know. Now with word order in German, and we're going to go back to the PowerPoint where we would normally be playing that spoons game in class. So let's take a look at the same context that we had before. We have that woman and she's giving you a gift, but we are able to change that order up a bit in German as long as our verb is in the second position and our subject is connected to the verb, which it is in the sentence. So if I choose to highlight you, what is you in the sentence? It is still the indirect object. And if I highlight the woman, that is still our subject. And the sentence still means the same thing. Now if we go to fill in what the endings are for each of these, or what the forms of the definite article and pronoun are, you as your indirect object would be dir, and the subject, woman, feminine, would be die, and then the gift as a definite article would be das. Dir schenkt die Frau Das Geschenk. All right, let's take a look at a different context. We have someone that's telling a story. So the mother must be telling her child or a story or reading him a book. So we can figure out what everything is in that sentence. A little hint here, we're not starting with our subject the way we normally do in English. So her son is receiving the story or the book, so he is our indirect object, dative, and our book is the direct object. That's what he's receiving. That's what's being verbed, what's being read. So that's our direct object. Now if we go and fill in the endings, let's first start with our indirect object. We notice that it is not der or ein. We have a possessive adjective here, her son. So our possessive adjectives take the same endings as our indefinite articles, our ein words. So to figure this out, we think about what ein would be in the masculine dative. That takes an em ending, and so that would be ihrem Sohn. And then we have the book. The book is our direct object. It is neuter. Direct objects are accusative, so that would be das Buch. And then our subject, the mother, feminine, would be die Mutter. All right, here we have another one. It looks like the mailman is bringing the girl a letter. So what am I highlighting here? We have the letter is highlighted. What is the letter in this sentence? It is our direct object. It's what's being verbed. It's what's being brought. How about the Postbote, the mailman? That is our subject. He is bringing the letter, and then the person that's receiving the letter is the girl, and so she's our indirect object. Now let's take a look at our endings on these. Should be den Brief and der Postbote. And then our indirect object would be dem Mädchen. Here's another one. The bakers are selling the old woman the bread. So the old woman, she is the indirect object. And the bread, that is our direct object. Now let's come up with our endings. We have der alten Frau, feminine dative, indirect object is der. And das Brot, direct object, accusative, neuter. And our subject is die Bäckerinnen. In this next one we have she is fetching her family meat. She is highlighted, that is our subject. And then the next thing that is highlighted is her family. Her family is the indirect object because they're receiving the meat. And then if we go through and we figure out our endings for these, she is the subject, so we have to think about our nominative form of that pronoun. So that would be sie. And then we have our indirect object on a possessive adjective. So this is following our indefinite articles chart, our ein word chart. And this is dative feminine, so that's ihrer. And then the meat is our direct object, so that's accusative neuter, and that would be das. All right, this is the last one. They sell her a bread. We are going to determine what her is in the sentence. So she's receiving the bread, that's the direct object. So if she's receiving it, that's our indirect object, dative. And the other part is they, that would be the subject, nominative. So if we come up with what these are, our subject would be sie, our indirect object would be ihr, and then ein Brot, our direct object, would not have an ending.